Have you been watching that show? You know, the big, sprawling, pointedly feminist fantasy streaming series based on a huge, beloved book series where one of the main characters in the major romance plot is basically fantasy Asian American, which is a departure from the books, and their place in the narrative makes them a perpetual foreigner among a caste and fictional society that is consciously diverse, leaving them as one of the only Asian faces where they are marked as different. I love that show! Netflix's Shadow and Bone, which just released its second season, is based on the Grishaverse book series by Jewish-American author Leigh Bardugo. Though there are many protagonists, the series centers around Alina Starkov, the Sun Summoner, the only one who can do light magic and defeat the Dark One. Played by Jessie May Lee, she is half Shuhan, which is basically just fantasy East Asia, called out by the narrative and other characters for being foreign, despite being native-born to the fantasy Eastern Europe in which she lives. Wheel of Time on Amazon Prime is an ambitious adaptation of the lengthy book series of the same name, written by American author Robert Jordan and finished by Brandon Sanderson after his death. In a world where only women can do magic, Lan Mandaragan, played by Korean-American actor Daniel Henney, is one of the most beloved male characters, is a bodyguard and co-leader of a group on a quest to defeat the Dark One. He begins as a mysterious figure, eventually revealed to be a refugee and sole survivor of a foreign nation's royalty. As full disclosure, I haven't read either of these book series, so I'll be looking at the TV series only.
It feels like nerd homework. It's like, I know I should read this, and I'd rather...
And from what I understand, both television series changed a bunch anyway, so sorry, book fans,
when people tell you it gets really good at book 7,
That's a hard sell.
Adaptation's gonna adapt. Let's start with Shadow and Bone, and where Shadow and Bone starts, which is the race of its main character, Alina Starkov. Alina feels disconnected from the society that she's been born into. She's an orphan. Both of her parents were taken away by the evil dark magic that divides her country. Her only real friends are the other cartographers in the army that she has been enlisted into, and her romantic interest, Mal, who she grew up with in the orphanage. But come to find out, she's the destined Sun Summoner. She's magical. She's amazing. But she's always remembered for being half Shu. Her lack of a sense of belonging is her main motivation for a lot of what she does in the first season. She's looking for somewhere to belong, and when someone presents it and turns out to be the bad guy, she takes the opportunity to have a place where she no longer will be experiencing overt racial aggression. There's a lot of it in the first episode. Once Alina is more grounded in her identity as Sun Summoner, she's allowed by the narrative to explore more of her racial identity. She meets other characters who are half Shuhan, who feel that they belong in neither place. Her sense of confusion is validated. It's heard and repeated back to her. And then after about the second episode of the second season, that's kind of it. Her whole thing about not belonging, about the racial prejudice that she's experienced, just kind of goes away. She's busy. And Alina isn't actually the only main character of Asian descent. She's the only one who has to have big character development about it, but both Inej and Mal are played by characters of Nepali or Indian descent. That's Asia, right? Lan, on the other hand, is not the main character of Wheel of Time, like Alina is for Shadow and Bone. She's 100% the main character. So Lan is introduced as basically like the bodyguard and keeper, they call it a warder, high fantasy vocab, whatever, to a very powerful magician lady. He and she are there's soul bonded, and they care for each other a lot. But we don't get really any of that until later into the series. The first few episodes, we're as lost about who this Lan guy is as everybody else. He doesn't really say much, and I think it's telling that one of the first things that anyone asks him is, where are you from? As we get to know Lan more through his various struggles and budding romance with the most valid woman of all time, we learn that he's the sole survivor and a refugee from a nation that died due to the conquest of the Dark One. There's a lot of Dark Ones. For the first several episodes, Lan is the only Asian face at all. We start seeing Asian extras a few episodes in, but we don't get other Asian major characters, even speaking characters, until the series is almost over. And all those people are in a city that's basically medieval Japan. Lan is marked as an outsider, a refugee who looks like people who live very far over there. I forgot to talk about how Lan is super hot. Lan is really hot. Asian American men often remark that they're kind of not allowed lead roles, especially not lead romantic roles or lead like sexually attractive roles in Hollywood. Lan does not count. Lan is romantically desirable. He's kind of the hottest character, and he's extremely emotionally vulnerable. He's one of the only characters who both openly cries and openly expresses and receives romantic and sexual desire. The reason why I wanted to talk about these two series in particular is because the racially diverse casting, both of them, either consciously or not, justify the presence of their Asian lead when they don't do for any of their black, brown, or white leads. Shadow and Bone does this a little bit. It tells us there are other places that are kind of equivalent to India or Africa or Russia, but Alina's the only one who has to like explain herself. Alina's the only one who has to go through character development about it. Wheel of Time, on the other hand, says that in world no one can tell where anybody is from, partially because the world ended 3,000 years ago, so any kind of race got all mixed up. But there's still heavily Asian-coded areas and Asian-coded characters. Lan wears his crisscrossy kimono. He fights with a katana. The other warders don't do that. Is that, like, his culture? None of the other characters have to say, hey, this is where I'm from, this is my backstory. They're just allowed to be. They don't have to be from a different cultural context, especially not so one well-defined as the one Lan is from. The audience isn't really allowed to forget either Lan or Alina's race, whereas they kind of are encouraged to do so for everybody else. What it seems to me is that even though we're in a fantasy world with no Asia and no America, Asian Americans are still perpetual foreigners, while other races don't have to justify themselves. Our shifting definitions of what Asian American means in a society that defines white and black is constantly changing. Model minority, perpetual foreigner, the foreign enemy. But, I mean, as Gary Okihiro points out in his essay, Is Yellow Black or White? Yellow is emphatically neither white nor black, but insofar as Asians and Africans share a subordinate position to the master class, yellow is a shade of black, and black a shade of yellow. By seeing only black and white, the presence and absence of all color, whites render Asians, American Indians, and Latinos invisible, ignoring the gradations and complexities of the full spectrum between the racial poles. At least that's how it is in our world. In fantasy worlds where race relations between black, white, and brown are largely ignored, Alina and Lan still have to negotiate their own race when no one else really has to. I don't have a big conclusion like we should condemn these shows because they kind of have a clunky approach to race. I like both of these shows. I had a good time with both of them. And it's a great thing that fantasy is becoming more diverse, both racially and even sexuality. I didn't really touch on that, but that's a big major part of both of these series too. I think modern fantasy and the people who enjoy it are more aware now than ever that we carry assumptions with us when we go into a fantasy world. We can't just leave them at the door, but we can interrogate them. And we can think about what they mean, both within the narrative and in our real lives. I think that's all I want to say. This was a project for Asian American media, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching.